Have you ever noticed that the moment a cat chose you, something in your inner world, quiet, patient, and mysterious, started rearranging itself? That small, almost accidental selection feels less like acquiring a pet and more like receiving an invitation, a shift that is felt more than explained. For many people, the sensation is unmistakable, yet it rarely gets named or examined. We live in a culture that prizes visible rights and tidy explanations, so the slow, interior work of a feline companionship often slips beneath notice. There's a tempting way to describe this: training schedules, behavioral manuals, lifestyle hacks, but the change I'm talking about isn't a skill you learn so much as an atmosphere you begin to inhabit. The cat-owner relationship can act as a subtle spiritual catalyst, not a curriculum of practices, but a persistent rearrangement of interior rhythms and thresholds of attention. Over time, small habits of waiting, noticing, and responding to another will quietly reframe how you experience solitude, presence, and even authority in your own life. This video will look at that quiet rearrangement from 3 angles: the symbolic meanings cats evoke, the inward transformations they elicit, and the social ripples their presence creates in a household and community. I'll point to patterns and moments, archetypal, emotional, and cultural, without offering a how-to guide or step-by-step journaling prompts. Think of it as an exploration of what happens to the shape of a life when a creature that refuses instruction becomes, simply by being itself, a kind of understated spiritual companion. Number 1. Archetypes and symbols: what cats represent spiritually. The cat as solitary guide carries a quiet authority that feels less like instruction and more like example. In its measured independence and self-contained movements, it models a form of interior seeking that is both deliberate and unshowy, a creature that knows how to be rooted in its own needs without demanding the spotlight. For owners, this presence can awaken an unexpected appreciation for being enough unto oneself, a reminder that wisdom sometimes arrives not through counsel, but by witnessing another being who lives from an inner center. As threshold guardian, the cat lives on the edge of worlds, slipping effortlessly between windowsill sun and shadowed corner, between the household's routines and whatever stirs beyond perception. This liminality makes cats uncanny translators of borders. They notice the draft a human ignores, pause at a doorway as if listening to something the ear cannot name, and thereby make the border between the visible and the invisible palpable. Their movements invite owners to attend to margins and moments where meaning accumulates quietly, where small crossings feel charged with significance. Cats function as mirrors of mystery, reflecting the unspoken textures of an owner's inner life. A cat's sudden avoidance can expose underlying tension. Its insistence on presence can reveal an unacknowledged need for comfort or steadiness. In these refracted moments, latent potentials, patience, subtlety, and the capacity to tolerate ambiguity are surfaced not by explicit lesson, but by reciprocal living. The cat's inscrutable behavior amplifies what already exists inside the human, making the hidden contours of character more visible. Number 2. Presence and attention: how cats reshape inner time. A cat's quiet presence often arrives as an unspoken invitation to stillness. When a cat curls onto a windowsill or settles against a lap, it asks, without demand, for a kind of gentle attention that softens the sharp edges of rushed waking life. Those small shared pauses change the quality of moments. A distracted morning becomes a place where breath lengthens, eyes slow, and the world's hurry briefly loses its authority. In this way, the animal's simple being opens a pocket of receptivity where inner clutter thins and awareness can rest. Alongside stillness comes a subtle recalibration of rhythm. Living with a cat introduces micropauses into the day, waiting while it finishes a stretch, postponing a task to follow its sudden request for proximity, that quietly reorder priorities without any intentional self-improvement program. These tiny adjustments accumulate, smoothing the cadence of ordinary life and teaching an attentiveness to tempo rather than outcome. Over months and years, the household's pace can shift in ways owners barely notice until they realize their days have more room for unhurried moments. Cats also cultivate a sensitivity to negative space, the silences and absences we usually pass over. An empty chair where a cat used to nap, the hush after a sudden flurry of play, the soft stillness of a room at dusk. These gaps become charged with meaning when attended by a feline companion. That awareness turns absence into a medium rather than a void, inviting reflection on what is implied rather than stated. In living with such intervals, owners often find themselves more comfortable inhabiting the quiet between events, recognizing silence itself as part of a lived spiritual texture. Number 3. Boundary work and energetic distinctions. Cats teach autonomy not by sermon, but by example. Their deliberate separateness and self-possession outline a way of being that reads like a quiet lesson in boundaries. Observing a creature that moves through the world with its own internal compass exposes the contingency of many human habits of clinging or over-attending. The effect on relational life is subtle. Owners often find themselves recognizing in the cat's refusal or readiness to engage a model of dignity that reframes how they hold space for others and for themselves. That same presence acts as a kind of emotional filter, clarifying the textures of feeling that otherwise blur together. A cat's response, or lack of one, can make sudden emotions feel less inflated and more distinct. Irritation, tenderness, anxiety, and serenity each show up with a different density when shared with a feline companion. Over time, those repeated encounters thin the haze of automatic reaction, making emotional states more legible and less prone to being mistaken for identity. And because these encounters are repetitive and intimate, ordinary corners of the home accumulate layers of meaning and become domestic shrines of everyday life. A sunlit patch on the floor, a particular chair, the rhythm of feeding and settling, these places gain a charged quality, repositories of quiet history and ongoing presence. In living spaces so touched, the household itself becomes a small sacred geography, where gestures that once seemed trivial gather weight and invite a softer, reverent attention. Number 4. Shadow encounters and unexpected initiations. There are moments when a cat's inexplicable behavior feels less like pet antics and more like a hand held up to a mirror, forcing you to notice what you'd rather not. A sudden hiss at an unremarkable sound, furtive avoidance, or a compulsive demand for attention can expose fears, jealousies, or long-buried comforts that you had folded away. These small provocations don't moralize, they simply illuminate, making visible the tucked-away emotional textures that daily politeness and distraction usually hide. Alongside those revelations come what might be called minor initiations, low-key, recurring events that test patience and prompt subtle reorientation. A prolonged, intense stare late at night, an insistence on being let out at an odd hour, the way a cat will refuse to eat until a particular person arrives. Each is a tiny ritual that interrupts habitual patterns and asks for a quiet response. They aren't dramatic epiphanies, but their cumulative effect is initiatory, repeated soft challenges that refine how you meet the world and yourself. The most persistent lesson in living with a feline is the tension between acceptance and control. Cats refuse to be managed into compliance. Their autonomy demands a posture of accommodation rather than command. That friction teaches a steady, modest surrender, an acknowledgement that some aspects of life are shared with a being whose inner logic won't be domesticated. In that ongoing negotiation, owners learn to loosen grips, adjust expectations, and cultivate a humility that quietly reshapes their sense of agency. Number 5. Community, myth, and the social afterlife of cat ownership. Human imagination has long folded cats into stories and myths that grant them a kind of spiritual authority, from household guardians and lunar companions to uncanny psychopomps at the threshold of other worlds. Felines recur as figures that mediate mystery. These cultural echoes don't need precise citations to matter here. They act as a backdrop that makes a domestic cat feel larger than its size, an animal whose very gait and gaze carry the residue of old stories and collective sense-making. Among owners, that shared sense of something more often turns into quiet conspiracies, an unspoken language of knowing looks, the exchange of small stories about uncanny behaviors, tips phrased as folklore rather than instructions. These networks are informal and gentle. Neighbors comparing the peculiar timing of their cat's rituals, friends trading the kind of domestic anecdotes that silently confirm deeper meanings. In those exchanges, the personal becomes communal, and small moments of wonder are validated and amplified. Finally, a cat's presence shapes a household long after specific events have passed. The rhythm of daily rituals, the choice of a favorite chair, the way photographs are arranged, all bear the imprint of a cat's life and later, its absence. That legacy is not theatrical. It is a slow sediment of memory and ritual that alters the spiritual atmosphere of a home, making certain spaces and gestures resonant with history, loss, and a peculiar ongoing tenderness. The relationship between a cat and its owner often begins without ceremony, a glance, a choice, a small refusal, and in that quiet exchange, a tacit promise is made. It's an unscripted covenant. The cat offers its peculiar presence, and the human in turn rearranges aspects of attention, patience, and interior space to accommodate it. Over time, that unspoken agreement accrues meaning, not because anyone signed on to a creed, but because living alongside a sentient, ungovernable companion reshapes everyday expectations and habits in ways words seldom capture. Those small shifts pile up into a long-term contour of being, a more patient tempo, a tolerance for ambiguity, a humility about control. These are not dramatic conversions, but durable adjustments, an altered posture towards solitude, ritual, and relationality that quietly distinguishes the life of someone who has shared mornings and nights with a cat. The change is cumulative and unflashy. Its power lies in longevity and repetition rather than spectacle. If there's a last note to leave you with, it is simply this: notice. Without prescriptions, without a to-do list, just pay attention to how certain silences, rituals, or shifts in rhythm might trace back to that feline presence beside you. Whether you shrug it off as a coincidence or accept it as a subtle initiation, the question remains open. Has your cat, in ways you scarcely named, altered the shape of your inner world?